Hello and welcome to More to the Story with Molly White. I'm so glad you joined me again today. And we have another great episode. I know I say it every time, but I truly believe they're all great and they're so informative. And today is no different. So I'd like to bring in my awesome, wonderful co host, Mary Browning, so we can talk about our special guest. Hey, Mary.
Yes, Molly. Hello, Molly. We do have a special guest today, and we're coming at this a little from a little different angle than we sometimes do. But it's someone else that had an unplanned pregnancy, but she made a different decision.
She did, and we've never had a guest on like this before. So she is our first one, and she was actually introduced to us by a guest that we had on previously that talked about the third option that you're very involved in. And so, what
Yes.
is the third option? Remind our audience.
The third option is really when you're considering if you have an unexpected or unplanned pregnancy, there's really two options that usually come to mind. I could either keep my baby or I can have an abortion. The third option is, of course, adoption. There's a lot to learn because adoption has changed over the years. And that's why we consider it now the third option, because not very many people have chosen that option.
Absolutely. But we've had adoptive mothers on here talking about their story. But now we're going to have a birth mother on. And her name is Sydney Curtin. She is a powerful voice in the adoption community, a dynamic speaker, a published author, a consultant, and a life coach who transforms her personal story into a message of hope, empowerment, and reform. As a birth mother who has walked the road of both heartbreak and healing, Sydney brings an unmatched authenticity to her mission to give voice to women navigating adoption and to reshape the way our culture, courts, and communities understand it. With over a decade of leadership, she doesn't look that old, as a multi business owner and serial entrepreneur, Sydney has built a platform that builds professional excellence with deeply personal advocacy. She is the author of Courageous Considerations, which I cannot wait to talk about, which is a groundbreaking guide designed to equip birth mothers and adoptive families with the questions, tools, and clarity they need when facing the life altering decisions. And her work challenges the adoption industry to honor informed choice, dignity, and the humanity of everyone in the adoption triangle. And I can go on, but I want to introduce Sydney and have her introduce herself. So, welcome to More to the Story with Molly White, Sydney.
Thanks so much for such a gracious introduction. It's so nice to chat with you guys.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you on. Mary is too, because this is Mary's wheelhouse. You know, she's very involved in the third option. So, Sydney Curtin, where do you live in northern Colorado?
Yes, ma'am.
Is the weather getting cooler there now?
It's cooling off a little bit, but it's a nice break from the heat. But I can't really say that considering you're in Texas now.
Yeah, we're waiting for that cooler weather. Well, Sydney, you were introduced to us, and I just could not wait to invite you on our show because you're the first birth mom that we've had an opportunity to interview, to hear your story, and to hear how God has used all of that in your life. So please just, tell the audience, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the helicopter view of the background that led me to where I am today, I found out that I was facing an unplanned pregnancy when I was 20 years old, turning 21. And I was expecting a child with somebody that was not a safe individual. I knew that about him. I knew that about his family, and I knew that about the people that he hung out around. It was not just a sole reflection of him. I, of course, attracted a lot of brokenness at this period in my life. I didn't know the Lord. Actually, that's not entirely true. I did know the Lord, but I was really pushing away from his plan for my life. I thought that my way made more sense at the time. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I was isolated and ostracized from my family. My dad said, if you want to be an adult, then we don't want anything to do with you. Figure it out. So I was on my own at 20 years old, single, pregnant, terrified, with a lot of voices coming in to my life from all different angles about my worth, my ability to be a mother, my ability to get full custody of my daughter prior to her being born. I've always been somebody that's very determined. When I set my mind to something, it's going to happen. And to be honest with you, abortion was never, we talked a little bit, and Mary, thank you for explaining what the third option is to your listeners. It's something that we are a huge supporter of at Unplanned Good, the nonprofit that I just recently got put onto the board of. I've been working with Teresa Moorcroft, or Terry, for a couple years now, and she's such a passionate advocate for adoption. But for me, in my unplanned pregnancy, the two options were parenting or adoption. And that just came from a position of faith. For me, I knew that my daughter's life had intrinsic value apart from mine. And I couldn't even conceptualize the idea of punishing her for the mistakes and immaturity that I had demonstrated in my life to put me in this position. That was not something, even at 20 years old, which, looking back and seeing how our society is today, I recognize I'm the anomaly in that sense. But I knew that she had a purpose here, and that it was not my place to take that away from her, that God had given her to me despite the sinful nature of how she was conceived, and that it wasn't within the parameters of what God had designed for me or my life, that he had allowed her to come to me. God gave her to me and trusted that I would do what was best for her. Hellbent, I went to the county that I live in and tried to obtain full custody of my daughter prior to her being born, and quickly found out that that was not an option. They don't do that. They do not do paternity tests or custody cases prior to the child being born. And long story short, that was when I started to explore adoption.
Wow. And so, how was that process? I mean, um, I'm so impressed by your will and your mindset and your determination. You know, you bonded so quickly with your baby. And so, what were the steps that you had to take to to learn about adoption?
So adoption was painted inaccurately for me in my life because my mother had been adopted when her dad passed away when she was little. And my dad had been adopted by the man that his mother remarried when his dad left when he was little. Then I lost my mother to a drug addiction when I was 13 years old, or turning 13 years old. I later went on to be adopted by the woman that my dad remarried. So I had this idea that adoption was a normal thing that happened when you wanted to do what was best for a child that was in need, and that it would just kind of work out. But I hadn't really healed from what adoption looked like in my own life enough to understand the intricacies of this relationship dynamic. When I went into exploring adoption, I knew one thing about adoption outside of my relationships with adoption, which is different than at birth placement. And that was that I wanted to be a part of my daughter's life. If I cannot keep her and guarantee that she is safe in my custody, then whoever has the blessing of raising my daughter, because that's exactly what she was not going to cut me out of her life. Because I didn't consider just the first 6 months of her life. I considered the whole thing. And I had played out all of these scenarios. It was an exhausting and really draining and overwhelming process, because at the time I felt very unworthy to even ask questions. I had all of these questions circling in my mind about, what does this look like? How often can I see her? I want to name her. That was a big thing for me, was I wanted to name my daughter. But how do I ask these things when I'm the one that feels like I'm coming open-handed, like I don't even feel worthy enough of raising my child? So who am I to ask these things of you?
Wow. That is so, I'm just so blown away by that whole, you know, at 20 years old, the maturity level that you had and the thought process. But I know hindsight's 2020. But Mary, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I just did want to underscore too what Sydney mentioned. Now, Sydney, you were on the cutting edge probably for this concept, but that's certainly more common now than it once was, which is to stay involved. And
Yeah.
so I want our listeners to know that you can stay involved. There are different levels of involvement, and then we'll hear more about how that's worked for you, Sydney. But now many states have, you can enter into a contract with the prospective adoptive parents, the birth parents can, or birth mother, and that can dictate some of what the future communications can look like. So
Absolutely.
I think that's really important. Many people do not understand that piece of it. So thank you, Sydney. You were really insightful. I
Yeah.
think you must have been listening more to the living God than you even realized you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
So, because you were really bold there. Yes, thank
But
you.
and having all that in your family, so adoption wasn't anything foreign to you, but
Hmm.
yet placing your child for adoption was all new. And then so the agencies that you worked with, maybe why it inspired you to doing what you do today, they didn't make you feel comfortable enough to ask these questions, to
Well,
counsel with you, to really inform you of this decision.
Well, there were, and thank you for saying that. There were a lot of things that went into it, and it's why I later went on to get involved with Unplanned Good, which we'll get into. But and Mary, I appreciate you bringing that up too. So in 2019 was the year of my placement, and that those legally binding agreements, they're called PACAs. It's post adoption contact agreements that are legally enforceable in certain states. At the time, those were not legally enforceable for me. But the perspective that I came at this with is, if I cannot trust you, even in a handshake agreement, for what you're promising the floor of our relationship will be, if I am not posing to be a threat physically, emotionally, or spiritually to my child, and you're going to just pay me that lip service with no intention of maintaining the integrity of those promises, then why on earth should I trust you with raising my child? For me at the time, tacos were a formality because of that. But I quickly realized that that was not the case, because not everybody views the severity and the gravity of this decision as intently as I did.
Wow. So, how far along were you when you started considering adoption?
I believe I was 3 or 4 months into the process. I know it was such a blur, to be honest, because I tried so hard for so long to keep her. I know that I had a couple months to get to know my daughter's adoptive parents. And when I met with them, I placed through Nightlight Christian Adoption Agency, and I was paired with a very new social worker. But again, at the time, I'm 20 years old, and this person has more of an educational background than I do. She's employed for this agency, so I'm just going to trust that she knows what she's doing, naively at the time. But as you so pointed out, hindsight is 2020, and that came to be my demise, unfortunately. But it's not that they didn't say I couldn't ask questions. It's that they made me feel like what I wanted out of an open adoption was unrealistic. That if I were to find a family that honored that level of openness, that I would be the odd one out. They tried to place limitations on what was possible in the context of an open adoption by what they were looking at the statistic averages to be within the context of an open adoption. As Mary pointed out, open adoption can be quite literally whatever you want it to be. It's just that you have to find the family that also wants and aligns with what your goals for an open adoption are. That was where I went wrong. Was I allowed the red flags to get dismissed in the name of, I kept getting told, well, we'll just work that out, or we'll see how that goes. And that's not really, I mean, you don't do that when you're entering into a marriage. So
Right.
many things where couples, before they get married, they'll do premarital counseling. They sit down and talk about the 5 most common topics that lead to divorce. And it's like, no, we really got to talk through this if we're going to choose to spend our lives together. I always say that the difference is that adoption is almost more serious of an agreement. I would argue that it is. I just am careful about saying that, because the divorce rates in our country show that if somebody's not happy, they're going to walk away. You can't do that with adoption, because you are automatically entering into a relationship where this child will be around for the rest of the child's life, which means you're stuck here. And if you don't have a healthy relationship where we are built on mutual trust, morals, our goals are aligned, our communication styles have been really ironed out, we are already set up for failure. It really is the marriage of two families. And I say that in full acknowledgement that there are different legal authorities that the adoptive families hold versus the birth families, but no one family is less valuable than the other. The relationship dynamic just looks different.
Absolutely. So, just sparked a question. Do you feel that adoptive mothers are not as equal, or birth mothers are not treated as equal as adoptive mothers and fathers? And
I
do
do
you
feel
feel
that
a
our legal
disconnect?
system, I love that question. Thank you so much for asking that. So, one of the things that my daughter's adoptive mom said to me before our relationship really deteriorated, which I'm happy to also get into, one of the things that she said to me is she didn't want me to be called birth mom. And this is something from her that I've really clung to. And I actually teach it to legislators and House representatives that I work with, people that I am newly getting acquainted with, and anybody that I talk to in the context of adoption. And this comes from my daughter's adoptive mom. It's one of the reasons I really loved her at the beginning of our relationship and still love her. That relationship has just deteriorated since. But she said, I really
Oh,
don't like calling you birth mom because I feel like I'm objectifying what you did because you've done so much more for her than just give birth. Can we call you her first mom? And
oh,
ever since then, I've clung to that. And it's in the verbiage of my as well. I say birth mom just to clarify because society is more familiar with the term birth mother. But
right.
it's true. Any woman that has chosen the third option in Mary's terms here is they're so much more than a birth giver.
Yes, amen. And thank you for clarifying that
So,
because I've only known it
mhm.
by birth mom. I didn't
No,
know
that's quite all
any
right. No,
other
it's not.
terminology for
And
that.
that's
Mhm.
I have lots of grace for that. It's not an insult. It's really is
Oh,
an
no,
education barrier.
it is. And I love that. I love that. So you went on to have your baby, your little girl. And then I guess it was walk us through that process. You had uh, your baby girl. And then what happened?
So I went on later to have two other children and since have been married. But it was quite literally as soon as just 6 months after placement that they started to manipulate and change small things in the agreement that we had. For example, they did allow me to name my daughter. That was something that was really precious to me because I wanted her to know that I didn't just give birth to her, say, I don't know how to do this or I don't want to do this, because none of that was true. I put so much time and thoughtful intention into her life that I wanted to give her the gift of her name. They allowed me to do that, and they said that it was a beautiful name, that they loved the meaning of her name. And then they turned around and started calling her by her middle name, which I had allowed them to choose. We chose together,
Mhm.
but nonetheless, I allowed them to have the predominant choice on. So it felt like this very backhanded, yeah, you can name her and we'll keep that her first legal name, but we're actually just going to call her what we want to call her. The
Mm.
Some of the other things that started happening was just timeliness. And so we had 6 in-person visits per year was the minimum of our agreement, with photos uploaded to a shared photo account monthly. And they would regularly just miss uploading those photos. And so I did not come at them angrily or hostily. I actually felt like I was kind of walking on eggshells because I didn't want them to feel bad that they had forgotten. But those pictures were really precious to me because I had a huge hole in my heart. So I would text them and remind them about pictures and ask if they would kindly send some. That became burdensome for them, where they felt like they were being called out, I think, on their failure to communicate. These people are not very good at communication in general. And then from there, when she was 3 years old, they told me, even though they had told me that they were planted in Colorado, and we had an agreement that even if they moved out of state, that we would find a way to accommodate in-person visitation. I was going to eat the travel cost. I had already offered in advance to do that, but that we were going to continue to maintain this floor come hell or high water. But they came to me when she was 3 years old and said that they were moving my daughter out of the country. They moved her to France. And therefore, that's not a travel cost that I can eat 6 times a year for quite literally one day of a visit is all that I'm allotted with her. And therefore, our visitation switched to FaceTime. And it went on like that for probably a year and a half. And then after a year and a half of that, they came to me again and said, well, now we need to switch from 4 visits a year, or I'm sorry, 6 visits a year to 4 visits a year. And this is where I really drew the line because I recognized that I had no legal authority. So up until this point, I didn't throw a fit. It broke my heart. I would go home and cry for weeks. It was devastating to my family because my kids are like know why mom's so upset. But this is where I was like, respectfully, I can't have this conversation with you. We need to get the agency involved to mediate this because I don't understand what's going on. So that was in February of I guess 2 years ago. And we sat down with the agency. And here's the thing, I always fall back to what's best for the child, because this isn't really about me holding your feet to the fire. Okay. That's not what this is about. This isn't, you know what, you said this, and so help me, like, you have to maintain these promises. If as a society we look at co-parenting the same way that adoption has really switched to open adoption, because it's what's in the best interest psychologically for the early childhood development of the child, co-parenting really reflects the same thing. We used to see a lot of mother-dominated court cases, or custody cases is what I should say, rather. We see now that if a father and mother are all of those things, emotionally, physically, and mentally stable, then we see these cases being determined 50-50. We don't want to take these babies away from their mom and dad. We know that mom and dad play a very important role in this child's life. I use the same example. My daughter knows who I am at 6 years old, and she wants to spend time with me, and she has articulated that multiple times. So I came to the agency prior to our meeting, and I said, listen, she really isn't even of an age where she can conceptualize these long visits 6 times a year. She's like, why do I not see her more? Why do I stay on the phone with her for so long? Her attention span isn't that long. I came to them open-handed, and I said, but I know factually that 4 visits is not what's best for her. My background is in psychology. So can you help me mediate a conversation with them so it doesn't feel like it's coming from a selfish agenda from me? I want what's best for her in a way that's going to stop adopted children. You may already know this, but they often, when they have visits with their natural parents, will have these emotional swings thereafter the visits. That is largely due to the infrequency of those visits. If we had a better way of making that more digestible, we wouldn't see that extreme reaction. We see the exact same thing with supervised visitation when we're rehabilitating parents from a drug addiction, for example. If they're in like a house or a sober house or something like that, but they have supervised visitation with a social worker, those kids thereafter have these very extreme reactions. And it's because they don't know how to process this separation. They know that's mom or they know that's dad. Why do I only get to see mom or dad every so often? Adoption, we see the exact same or very similar side effects happen in these children with this infrequent visitation. Eventually, when we had that mediated conversation, the social workers and the agency told my daughter's adoptive parents the same thing. They said, listen, this is really probably not within her best interest. And not only that, but this is what you promised. And we recognize that it's not legally binding, but we really encourage, for the sake of this relationship to be healthy long-term, that we find a way to make this work. And I came in white flag. I was like, folks, if I have done anything wrong, and I mean anything, that I need to apologize for, that I owe you clarification on, that you need me to change in my behavior so that this relationship can be healthy and functional, tell me and I'll do it. My goal is to have a relationship with you that supports my daughter so that she knows that we're on the same page. Because right now she's not playing us against each other, but eventually we could encounter that if this relationship doesn't have a solid foundation. And right now I don't feel that it does.
Wow, I'm telling you, you're so smart. You're so insightful at your younger age. It's just amazing. But I'm very struck by how it's all about your daughter and what's best for your daughter and wanting to stay, in touch with her. But my question is, they made all these promises, but they weren't written in a contract or in your adoptive decree?
Were written, but going back to how in 2019, PACAs, the post-adoption contact agreements, were not legally enforceable. So it was really just a good faith agreement. What is really tricky about that is that what the agency didn't tell me at the time is that in some states, agreements between individuals are legally binding on a state level. Colorado is one of those states. Of course, they don't give you that information because they don't want outside expenses incurred. They don't want to have to involve more entities or lawyers or whatever have you, because that's cost that often the agency or the adoptive parents eat, which is something that can make an adoption fall through. But I could have, if they were willing, or if they weren't willing, I could have found another family. I would have been able to go to a family attorney and say, hey, we're entering into an adoption and I would like a legally enforceable contract from the
Yeah.
state. And that was not education that I was given or gifted.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and that is so sad because you write a promises, you write something down. This is what we're agreed to do, and then you start changing that in the in any kind of contract that shouldn't be legal at all. It
No,
shouldn't be right at all.
no,
You know, and that just leaves a lot of struggles, a lot of emotional turmoil, and for the first mother, for the child, for the adoptive mother. I mean, it's just all around not good for anyone
no.
to start making those changes.
Right.
And so we only have a few minutes left, and we need to kind of wrap up. So, what's happening now
So,
with your relationship?
well, since then, the relationship has really deteriorated. I now, since then, they have said that me, I've tried to propagate my own agenda, proving to be dangerous and manipulative. This is really pride and ego of my daughter's adoptive parents, specifically her adoptive mother. And I pray that the Lord continues to work on her heart, because I'll never stop fighting for my daughter. And she can be upset about it. She can be upset about the podcast. She can be upset about the book. She can be upset about the legal work. But my daughter will know that this didn't go to waste. It wasn't for nothing. That's where I found Teresa. And it's also when I decided to write my book to help protect other mothers from making the same mistakes. Because if you can walk a mile in my shoes, I might be able to save you from a lifetime of regret.
Amen. So let's see your book and let's talk about it a little bit and where our listeners and viewers can get it.
So this is the main book. This is Courageous Considerations. And this is the workbook. It's very short because when you're going through something like adoption, you don't need a homework assignment. It really is a bullet point list of questions. Most of the pages look something like this. These are the questions that I wish I would have asked myself or the adoptive couples to know that I was matching with somebody that was going to be a lifetime good fit for me in the context of adoption. It comes with the workbook. This is really it's got some coloring pages in it as well, but this is more so journaling prompts. One of the things that I wish that I would have done differently, sorry, the camera is like all weird.
I see.
One
I
of
see
the
your
things that I wish I would have done differently was really treasure my pregnancy with my daughter. But because I was in such a state of fight or flight, I didn't do that the way that I wished I would have. So the journaling workbook includes some things that I would have done more kindly to myself to really treasure the time that I had with her.
Wow, sounds beautiful, Mary.
Some Courageous Considerations by Sydney Curtin. You can they get that from your website?
You can get it on my website. Amazon is actually a little easier. I do offer signed copies as well. So if you message me either on Facebook or email me at info@coachcurtin.com, I do signed copies as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
And this Coach Curtin, is this like, I know it was like life coaching, but is it coaching with the adoptive process as well?
It's primarily that. Actually, I do financial consulting and some just general life coaching, but most of the clients that I work with are either birth mothers considering placement or adoptive families that just want to have, oftentimes those are once or twice a month during the process of meeting birth mothers. This book was written from the verbiage of a birth mother, and I did that out of respect because I am a birth mother, first mother, and an adoptee. So I didn't want to write it as though I had walked in the shoes of an adoptive mother, but these questions work both ways with just slight verbiage tweaks. I really recommend that anybody considering adoption from any angle really deeply consider the questions.
Amen.
So whether you're the prospective adoptive couple or whether you're a mother that's considering relinquishing your child through adoption, either set can benefit from your insight, is what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am. And I have reviews from adoptive parents, adoptees, and first mothers or first families, I should say, that have written reviews on the book that can be read and found on Amazon as well.
Very
Awesome.
good.
That's wonderful. And so what would, real quick, we have a young pregnant woman listening and she's in your shoes. She's, struggling whether she should, adopt or, place her child for adoption or other things. How would you encourage her?
God gave this child to you before anyone else. You do not have to make this decision for anyone other than you and your child. And there is no such thing as asking too much when it comes to your baby. Don't
Wow.
ever question your worth in the context of adoption. You are worthy.
Wow, and that's beautiful. And get in touch with Sydney. Her website is www.coachcurtin.com, and get her book. I can't wait to get it and read it and learn more about this. I have regrets. I regret I didn't place my baby for adoption. There's all kinds of things, and we don't want regrets for our listeners and our viewers. We want you to make well thought out decisions, but never go the abortion route because it's irreversible. So, Sydney, we're going to be praying for you and your precious daughter and in the the adoptive mother. We pray for reconciliation. We pray that God would move on her heart and that He would protect the heart of your precious daughter. Mary, thank you. Do you have any closing statements, Mary?
I was just thinking, in the pre-show, I think when we were talking, there was mention of having been through healing. So if we do another podcast, we might address that, because we do talk a lot about healing in the context of having made a different decision. So I think it would benefit our listeners to hear from that. So just hopefully you'd be able to come on for a part 2.
I would
And
love
I just,
about healing in a part 2.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Mary. That's a great comment. And so thank you, Sydney, for joining us here on More to the Story with Molly White and Mary Browning. And thank you, Mary. And thank you all for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.
thank you all.
Hello, friend. Our broadcasting wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for being a listener of the More to the Story podcast. Whether you're a longtime subscriber or just found us, we're so glad you're here. This podcast is a community built on sharing, and that's where you come in. If an episode has ever resonated with you, please consider sharing it. Text it to a friend, post it on social media. Your recommendation is the most powerful way to help these important stories reach new ears. We are also inviting businesses and individuals to partner with us as official sponsors. Sponsoring the podcast is a wonderful way to reach a dedicated, thoughtful audience while directly supporting our mission. If you'd like to explore sponsoring the podcast, we invite you to visit our website at www.moretothestorypodcast.org. Again, that's www.moretothestorypodcast.org. Thank you for being a part of our story.